What's up guys, TCG Guide here. In the last archetype analysis we looked at Fluffles, the cute cuddly monsters that made their way into our hearts in Arc V. If you haven't seen that yet, click on this link to go watch that first because these two archetypes are going to be played with Fluffles. And if you do like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more great videos like this. Okay, so we know that Fluffles are stuffed animals that are supposed to be played with Edge Imp monsters with how much they're mentioned on Fluffle cards. But what are they? Edge Imps are possessed blades that you'll fuse with Fluffles to absolutely dominate your opponent. There are only 5 Edge Imp monsters, and by far the most important is Edge Imp Sabers. Edge Imp Sabers is needed for almost all of your fusions, and is one of the few cards specifically mentioned, so 3 of is a must. Since Edge Imp Sabers is needed for so many fusions, it needs a way to keep coming back, and thankfully it has that built right in by way of special summoning Edge Imp Sabers in defense position from the graveyard by putting a card from your hand on the top of your deck. This might not seem that great, but like I mentioned in the Fluffles analysis, you play Toy Vendor. And by doing things in the right order, you can manipulate Toy Vendor to forcing a special summon by putting a Fluffle monster on top of your deck when you special summon Edge Imp Sabers, potentially getting you 3 fusion materials out in one turn. The next Edge Imp is Edge Imp Saw. Like Edge Imp Sabers, Edge Imp Saw is a level 3 monster and is mentioned by name on one of your fusion cards, so you might have to run it. Its effect can get you more cards for a fusion, since it has, when Edge Imp Saw is normal summoned, you can discard a Fluffle monster to draw 2 cards, then put a card from your hand on the top or bottom of your deck. The problem with this effect is there really isn't a good choice to discard to start it. You could discard Fluffle Wings and banish it from your graveyard, but this is only good if you have a Toy Vendor out and a Fluffle Bear to get another. Edge Imp Chain is the first of our level 4 Edge Imps, and it too is mentioned by name in a fusion. Edge Imp Chain's first effect almost never comes up since it has to attack, and with 1200 attack, that doesn't happen very often. Its second ability, however, is very relevant. If Edge Imp Chain is sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, you can add a Frightfur card from your deck to your hand. That means if it's used in a fusion summon, its effect goes off. If it gets attacked, its effect goes off. You discard it to activate Toy Vendor, its effect goes off. But you can only use one of its effects per turn. If you attack with him and want the second effect, you can't use his first effect. The last 2 Edge Imps are kind of unique. The first, Edge Imp Tomahawk, has 2 abilities that are both pretty useful. His first lets you discard a card to do direct damage to your opponent, and the second lets him act as a King of the Swamps by sending an Edge Imp monster from your deck to your graveyard, and Edge Imp Tomahawk's name becomes that monster's name. And you can use each of these abilities once per turn. If you aren't running King of the Swamp, he's a 3-up for sure. And our last Edge Imp is only an Edge Imp by name, Edge Imp Frightfuloid. Edge Imp Frightfuloid is always treated as a Frightfur, which makes it useful for some of your later fusions. But its effect makes it so you don't want it early or at all, since most Frightfurs don't have the best base stats, but build each other up while keeping your opponent down instead. And this seems like good a time as any to segue into our next section, Frightfurs. Frightfurs, with the exception of Frightfuloid, are what you get when you fuse Fluffle and Edge Imps. The resulting horrors do their best to win you the game by clearing the field, attacking multiple times, and powering up and protecting each other. Fluffle Bear was one of the 2 cards that really drew me into this archetype, one of the most specific of all the Frightfur fusions, requiring Edge Imp Sabers and Fluffle Bear. I wouldn't recommend him as your first fusion out with his subpar 2200 attack and 1800 defense. Of course, if your opponent has a monster Frightfur Bear can destroy by battle, then go for it. When Frightfur Bear destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can equip it to Frightfur Bear and give it an extra 1000 attack. This is only the first of 3 fusions that require Edge Imp Sabers, but the other 2 are a little more vague. The first of those 2, and the other card that really made me want to try this archetype, was Frightfur Tiger. Remember how I said Frightfurs keep your opponents down? Yeah, this guy is the one I was talking about. Fairly unassuming with only 1900 attack and 1200 defense, but when he's fusion summoned you can destroy cards on the field up to the amount of fusion materials used to summon him. That's not a fixed number either, since it requires Edge Imp Sabers and 1 or more Fluffles. This is where it starts getting vague, and that's how you win. Now you do have to target the cards to destroy them, but it's up to you how many fusion materials you need to make Frightfur Tiger. But with a bare minimum of 2, and it not being limited to spell and traps, it's better than Twin Twisters. To add to Frightfur's might, all Frightfur monsters you control get 300 attack for each Fluffle and Frightfur you control. This does include itself, so bare minimum he's got 2200 attack. Even though you can only control one Frightfur Tiger, I can't imagine running less than 3. Its removal and buff are just way too useful. The last of the fusions you need Edge Imp Sabers for is Frightfur Wolf. With only 2000 attack and 1500 defense, he isn't much of a threat, but after clearing the board with Frightfur Tiger, Frightfur Wolf becomes a threat your opponent has to deal with, since like Frightfur Tiger, he takes one or more Fluffles. You know he's got a sweet effect. And oh boy is this sweet. For each fusion material used, Frightfur Wolf gets that many attacks. With a bare minimum of 2, and if you used Frightfur Tiger to clear the field first, an additional 600 attack, he becomes a target real quick. The next Frightfur is the only one that uses Edge Imp Chain, and up until Fusion Enforcers was the most expensive Frightfur card of them all, and for good reason. Frightfur Sheep requires Edge Imp Chain plus 1 Fluffle monster. It has 2000 attack and defense. When it battles, your opponent can't activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step. And if it gets destroyed by battle or by an opponent's card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon it once per turn with an additional 800 attack. This deranged sheep just will not quit. But even though it is insanely good, since I only run a couple of Edge Imp Chains, I only recommend one of these. Okay, so your opponent's pretty much out of hope, right? One Frightfur getting bigger with each monster it destroys, one Frightfur clearing the field when it comes out and making everything stronger, one Frightfur attacking a bunch, and one that just won't go away. That's all, right? Nope. If you have an Edge Imp Saw and a Fluffle monster, you can make Frightfur Leo. And this Frightfur is quite frightful. 2400 attack and 2000 defense are alright, but why I love Frightfur Leo is because once per turn you can destroy a monster and deal damage to your opponent equal to its original attack. What's the drawback, you ask? Frightfur Leo can't attack directly the turn you use this ability. He can still attack, just not directly. So that's 2 monsters destroyed per turn by Frightfur Leo. Okay, these last few cards were really non-specific on their requirements, but it can't get worse than that, can it? Frightfur Kraken is here to prove you wrong. Got an Edge Imp? Got a Fluffle? Good enough. Not only is it super easy to release the Frightfur Kraken, it's like Frightfur Leo and Frightfur Wolf had a baby. It destroys an opponent's monster, and it can't attack directly if you do, like Frightfur Leo, and it attacks twice each battle phase, like Frightfur Wolf. And because the offspring is usually better than its parents, Frightfur Kraken gets an additional effect. When it battles, you can change it to defense position, which might be a good idea since Frightfur Kraken has 3000 defense and only 2400 attack. It can't get any less specific than that though, can it? Wrong again. Frightfur Sabertooth requires a Frightfur monster and 1 or more Edge Imp and or Fluffles to fusion summon. And oh my god cards, is it worth it. When it's fusion summoned, you can special summon a Frightfur monster in your graveyard, which you ever so conveniently now have. To make things even better, Frightfur Sabertooth gives all your Frightfurs an additional 400 attack. And if that wasn't enough, if you use 3 or more fusion materials to summon him, Frightfur Sabertooth can't be destroyed by battle or by card effects. And last but not least, we have the Blue Eyes Ultimate of Frightfurs, Frightfur Chimera. Frightfur Chimera takes 3 Frightfurs to summon and has 2800 attack, 2000 defense, and I'm just going to read this. Must be fusion summoned and cannot be fusion summoned by other ways. If this card battles, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can special summon that monster to your field, but its attack is halved. You can only use this effect of Frightfur Chimera once per turn. This card gains 300 attack for each monster you control that is owned by your opponent. Whew, that's a mouthful. If the game lasts long enough to get this out, your opponent will be wishing they let you end it sooner. Now, on to the support. Suture Rebirth is great. Not only does it let you special summon a Fluffle from the graveyard, but it can also get you a Frightfur from your graveyard, and you don't care that its effects are negated since you're just going to use them for a fusion material. Personally, I run 2 of these, and that seems to be the right number. Frightfur Fusion is one of your main fusion cards, but not the first one you want to use since you banished the fusion materials, and it either has to be from your field or in your graveyard. Personally, I run 2, and that's because it works really well with the next card on this list, and that's Frightfur Factory. Frightfur Factory lets you banish a polymerization or a fusion card from your graveyard, except a fusion wave motion to fusion summon a Frightfur monster, using monsters in your hand and on the field. The reason this works so well with Frightfur Fusion is because you banish Frightfur Fusion instead of Polymerization, leaving that for your cards that bring it back like Fluffle Bear or Fluffle Cat. Then, when Frightfur Factory gets sent to the graveyard, you can return a banished Frightfur Fusion card to your hand. I'd say keep this as a one-of. While it is useful in place with another card I run it too, you need a Frightfur Fusion first to make the best use of this. The last of the spells is Frightfur Sanctuary. It's a continuous spell card that lets you send 2 Frightfur monsters from your extra deck to the graveyard to make all your fusion monsters count as Frightfurs. This would be great for making things like Frightfur Sabertooth or Frightfur Chimera, if all your fusion monsters weren't already Frightfurs. I guess there is some use for this, since when it goes to the graveyard, you can return a Frightfur fusion monster to the extra deck from your graveyard, but I really can't see this as more than a one-of, if that. First up of our 2 traps is Fusion Fright Waltz, and it's a side deck card at best. It requires both you and your opponent to have a fusion monster. Then you destroy all other special summon monsters besides the fusion monsters you chose for you and your opponent. Then both players take damage equal to the combined attack of the 2 targeted fusion monsters. Best case scenario, you cause a draw in game 3, and that's only if your opponent is playing a fusion strategy. But to leave things on a much lighter note, we have Frightfur March. Let me tell you, this card has saved my ass so many times. When an opponent's card or effect activates and targets a Frightfur you control, negate the activation and destroy the card. Then send the targeted Frightfur to the graveyard. If you do, you can fusion summon a level 8 Frightfur and banish that Frightfur during the end step. So let's say you summon a Frightfur Tiger and your opponent uses an effect veiler to negate the destruction effect. You activate Frightfur March, and sure, you have to send Frightfur Tiger to the graveyard, but its effect still goes off. Then you can get a Frightfur Sabertooth out and get Frightfur Tiger right back. Not saying this has happened to me before, but yeah, super clutch card. And that's it guys, thanks so much for sticking through to the end. Click the like button to show you made it. I hope you enjoyed this archetype analysis on Fluffles, Imps, and Frightfurs. Be sure to subscribe for more and let me know what you thought of the video or what you think of the archetype down in the comments. For all things Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh!, check the TCG guide, and have a great day guys.